The first time I saw Andrea, I was sprinting through cold night air with something fragile pressed to my chest. Luna, my tabby, my little shadow, was bundled in a towel that couldn't stop the blood from spreading. The emergency vet's fluorescent lights hit me like an interrogation lamp as I stumbled inside, blinking hard, trying not to panic. That's when I heard a woman's voice at the front desk. Sharp, controlled, furious, arguing like the world owed her an answer. She stood there with a huge German shepherd leaning against her leg, whimpering and favoring one paw, while she snapped at the receptionist about waiting times and psychotic cats. The words pierced straight through my fear, and before I could stop myself, I said, "Your dog broke into my yard and hurt my cat." She turned fast, green eyes locking onto mine. She was striking in a hard-earned way. Athletic build, a faint scar near her brow, posture like she'd been trained to hold the line. "Your cat started it," she said, like it was a fact carved into stone. The waiting room went quiet, strangers suddenly watching us like a live show. My hands shook around Luna's towel, but my voice came out steady anyway. "She's 12 pounds. Your dog is 3 times her size. That isn't a fair fight." For a heartbeat, Andrea's jaw flexed, and I expected her to double down. Instead, her gaze dropped to Luna, and something softened, just a crack, like her anger had run into tenderness and didn't I know what to do with it. We ended up in chairs side by side, the tension still thick, but no longer poisonous. She kept stroking Rex's fur with a gentleness that didn't match her earlier bite, and I kept whispering to Luna like my words could hold her together until the vet called us back. "I'm Andrea," she said after a moment, quieter now. "I didn't mean to snap. Rex means everything to me." I swallowed, the heat in my chest cooling into something more human. "I'm Vivien," I replied. "Luna's all I've got, too." Our eyes met again, and the harsh clinic lighting felt less cruel for a second. When they finally called my name, I stood with Luna and glanced back. Andrea was watching me, her expression unreadable, like she'd had just recognized something familiar in a stranger and didn't want to admit it. Weeks later, she found me in a cafe, looking nothing like the midnight version of herself. No fury, no sharp edges, just a leather jacket, tired eyes, and a hesitant question. "Mind if I sit?" We talked like two people circling the same loneliness from different angles. She ran a marksmanship and self-defense club. She admitted she had military history without spilling details she wasn't ready to name. I told her music was all I'd ever trusted completely, that composing was the only place I felt in control. Somehow, those two worlds didn't clash the way they should have. She invited me to her range after hours. I said yes, even though I'd never held a gun in my life, because the truth was her presence made me feel strangely safe. Later, in the quiet of my apartment, I played a piece I'd started writing without realizing it was about her, sharp notes that softened into something aching and brave. Andrea cried like the music had touched a wound she'd been hiding from the light. She didn't ask me to fix it, she just let me see it. And that honesty, raw and imperfect, pulled me toward her more than charm ever could. Love didn't arrive like fireworks, it arrived like shelter. 2 months into our relationship, I was volunteering at the Rainbow Crisis Hotline on a Thursday night, repeating the same gentle opening line I'd said 100 times. "This is Vivien. I'm here. Take your time." The caller stayed silent at first, then breathed shakily into the receiver like she was deciding whether hope was worth the risk. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and worn thin. "I'm trapped," she whispered. "He controls everything." I guided her through the safety questions, the careful steps, the quiet choices. Then she said my name like it belonged to her memory. "Viv, it's Emma." My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might be sick. Emma Rodriguez, my first love from college, the girl who vanished without a goodbye, the girl I grieved like a death because I never got answers. "I need to see you," she said, voice breaking. "Please, I can't do this alone." She told me where to meet her, an abandoned building in the warehouse district, then begged me to come alone. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone like it had betrayed me. Outside, under a street lamp, I called Andrea with shaking hands and told her the truth. Her voice didn't turn cruel or jealous. It turned protective, sharp with purpose. "You're not going alone," she said. I argued. She refused. Either I'm there or you don't go. When I arrived at the warehouse and saw Emma step out of the shadows, hollowed, bruised, frightened, I understood why she'd called. I also understood how dangerous this was. Then a man's calm voice slid through the darkness like a blade. "Vivien Mitchell," he said smoothly. "I've been waiting to meet you." Marcus Kellerman stepped into view, well-dressed, confident, the kind of man who looked respectable until you noticed the ownership in his eyes. Emma flinched like her body had been trained to fear him before her mind caught up. He smiled at me like I was a problem he could manage. I reached for my phone, but his attention snapped to my movement. "Don't," he warned softly. And the softness was the most terrifying part. Before he could step closer, the warehouse door slammed open with violent force, metal shrieking against concrete. Boots hit the floor, fast, controlled, decisive. Andrea's voice cut through the dark like command. "Vivien, get down!" In that instant, everything inside me split in two. Fear on one side, relief on the other. Because the past had found me again, but I wasn't the same woman I used to be. And neither was the woman who loved me enough to run into the dark to bring me back out. The sound of Andrea's boots hitting concrete shattered the fragile stillness of the warehouse. She moved with a speed and certainty that did not belong to this world of rusted beams and broken windows, her body instinctively positioning itself between me, Emma, and the man who called himself Marcus Kellerman. In the half-light, she did not look like the woman who laughed on my couch or listened to Chopin with her eyes closed. She looked like something forged, something trained to stand in the space where danger thought it owned the ending. "Step away from them," she said, her voice calm in a way that was far more frightening than shouting. Marcus's smile faltered just a fraction. He'd expected fear. He hadn't expected resistance. Emma's fingers dug into my sleeve as if she were anchoring herself to the last solid thing she knew. "Viv, he's not bluffing," she whispered. "He has people everywhere." Marcus let out a soft laugh, the sound polished and hollow. "You see?" he said, gesturing at her like she was evidence. "She understands how the world actually works." He took a slow step forward. Andrea mirrored him instantly, her stance shifting, her shoulders squaring, her weight grounded. "I understand how men like you work," Andrea replied. "And I understand exactly how much damage you can do when no one stops you." Marcus's gaze flicked to her, assessing. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Someone who doesn't like bullies," Andrea said, "and someone who's already called this in." She raised her phone slightly. Not as a threat, as a fact. "Everything you've said since you walked in is recorded, including the part where you admitted you monitor your wife's calls." His jaw tightened. The confidence that had wrapped around him like a tailored suit began to crease. "You're making a mistake," he said coldly. "This is a domestic matter. You have no idea what kind of people you're involving yourselves with." "Oh, I do," Andrea replied. "And you have no idea what kind of woman you're threatening." One of the men behind Marcus shifted, testing the air like a dog deciding whether to bite. Andrea didn't look at him. She didn't have to. Her awareness filled the space. "Emma," Andrea said without taking her eyes off Marcus. "If you want out, we can get you out. Not tomorrow. Tonight." Emma shook, tears cutting clean lines down her face. "He'll find me," she whispered. "He always does." I turned to her, heartbreaking at the certainty in her voice. "Not if you don't disappear the way he expects," Andrea said. "There are people who help women like you start over safely. New city, new accounts, new routines, real protection. I can make that call." The word protection tasted like oxygen. Marcus's composure cracked. "You think you can steal my wife and walk away?" he snapped. "You think a few pretty words and a phone call make you powerful?" He lunged forward. Everything happened too fast to be memory and too slow to be dream. Andrea moved. She didn't rush him. She angled, redirected. One sharp motion took his arm out of alignment. A second sent him stumbling back. The man behind him surged forward, but Andrea was already shifting, already turning his momentum against him, slamming him into a pillar with a sound that made my stomach lurch. The warehouse filled with the raw music of bodies colliding, breath tearing from lungs, the echo of impact off hollow walls. Marcus recovered and swung, catching Andrea across the ribs. I heard the sound before I felt it in my own chest, a dull, terrible thud. She staggered, but she didn't fall. "Stay back!" She barked at me when I instinctively moved forward. Emma crouched behind a concrete barrier, hands over her mouth, eyes wide with horror and awe. Andrea wiped blood from her brow with the back of her hand and reset her stance like pain was a language she spoke fluently. Marcus charged again, rage stripping away the civility he wore like camouflage. Andrea met him halfway. They went down hard, the fight becoming brutal and close. Less choreography and more survival. Somewhere in the chaos, sirens began to wail, distant at first, then unmistakably closer. Marcus heard them too. His eyes flicked toward the broken windows, calculation blazing through the anger. He shoved Andrea back, trying to break past her. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You can't hide her forever." He reached for Emma. Andrea surged between them, taking the blow meant for her. She drove her shoulder into his chest, forcing him back just as red and blue light washed the warehouse walls. "Police!" a voice thundered. "On the ground! Now!" The men froze. Marcus's face rearranged itself in seconds, rage dissolving into wounded innocence. "Thank God," he said loudly, raising his hands. "My wife has been kidnapped. These women are unstable. She's been having episodes." "Stop," Andrea said, breath rough, blood running into her eyebrow. She held up her phone. "You've already said enough." The officers moved fast, separating everyone, radios crackling, flashlights cutting through dust and fear. Emma was wrapped in a blanket. I was checked for injuries I didn't remember earning. Andrea was guided to sit, an EMT already assessing her side. Marcus protested, demanded, threatened. It didn't matter. Emma spoke. The recording spoke. The bruises on her wrists spoke. The control he'd exercised so quietly for so long finally had witnesses. When they cuffed him, he leaned toward Emma, venom in his voice. "You'll regret this." She didn't shrink. She stood taller than I had ever seen her stand. "Not as much as you will," she said. And for the first time since she'd called me, her voice didn't sound like it belonged to someone trapped. It sounded like it belonged to someone who was leaving. The warehouse slowly emptied, chaos giving way to procedure, flashing lights settling into steady red and blue pulses that painted the cracked walls like a living bruise. Officers spoke into radios, took statements, photographed injuries. Marcus Kellerman was led past us in handcuffs, his expensive coat now dust-streaked, his expression caught between fury and disbelief. He looked at Emma one last time, searching for the obedience he'd carved into her, the fear he'd trained into her bones. He didn't find it. She stood wrapped in a blanket, shoulders trembling, but her eyes were clear. When he was pushed through the doors and into the cold night, something in the building seemed to exhale. Paramedics insisted on checking Andrea more thoroughly. She argued as she always did until the medic pressed 2 fingers gently against her ribs, and she hissed through her teeth, all the fight draining from her posture in one honest moment. They guided her onto a folding stretcher, cleaning the cut above her eye, securing her arm. Seeing her like that, still strong, still stubborn, but undeniably hurt, did something terrifying to my chest. I hovered uselessly at her side until a nurse gently told me to give them space. Emma stood a few steps away, watching, guilt written across her face. "I never wanted her to get hurt," she whispered. "None of this is your fault," I told her, even though part of me was already building an altar for blame inside my head. At the hospital, everything smelled like antiseptic and fatigue. Andrea sat on a narrow bed, her arm in a sling, a thin bandage cutting across her brow. The doctor explained she'd bruised a rib, strained her shoulder, nothing that wouldn't heal. I nodded, thanked him, listened. But when we were finally alone, a different silence settled between us. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that hums. "You lied to me," Andrea said quietly. I swallowed. "I was trying to protect you." Her eyes lifted, and the hurt in them was sharper than any anger. "I've lived in places where the wrong lie gets people killed," she said. "You told me the meeting spot was safe. You told me it was public. You took that choice away from me." "I was scared," I admitted. "I didn't want you thinking I was running back to my past. I didn't want you to feel replaceable." Andrea exhaled slowly, like she was controlling something that wanted to tear out of her. Vivien, I didn't need protecting from Emma. I needed honesty from you. The words landed heavier than any blow she'd taken that night. She asked for air. I watched her walk out onto the hospital's rooftop garden, her posture still disciplined, still controlled, but fractured by pain and something deeper. I followed after a few minutes. The city spread below us like a field of distant stars. She stood at the railing, eyes unfocused. I almost lost you tonight, she said without turning. And I almost lost you, I answered. That's exactly the problem. I moved beside her. When Emma called, part of me went back to being 20, to unfinished questions, to wounds I never stitched closed. And I was afraid if I told you everything, you'd think I was still standing there. Were you? She asked. I didn't answer right away. The truth deserved more respect than speed. I loved her, I said finally. What we had was real, but it was fragile. It depended on hiding, on shrinking, on hoping the world wouldn't look too closely. Seeing her tonight didn't reopen that door. It closed it. Because I saw what fear did to us, and I saw what love does to us. Andrea turned then, searching my face. What does love do? She asked. It runs into dark places, I said. It doesn't ask who deserves saving. It doesn't calculate safety. It shows up. The way you did. And when I thought Marcus might hurt you because of me, something in me broke open. I realized the idea of losing you is unbearable. Not dramatic unbearable. Real unbearable. Her jaw tightened. Vivien, I love you, I said. Not because you're strong, not because you saved us, but because you see me, and you don't ask me to disappear to be safe. The words hung between us, naked and unarmored. Andrea closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. I love you too, she said. That's why this hurts. I don't want a relationship where we protect each other from the truth. I want one where the truth is the protection. I nodded. No more secrets. No more deciding alone. She studied me for a long moment, then lifted her uninjured hand and rested it against my cheek. We can't promise we won't be afraid, she said, but we can promise we won't hide. I leaned into her touch, relief washing through me so powerfully my knees felt weak. When she kissed me, it wasn't urgent or hungry. It was grounding. A yes built out of pain instead of fantasy. Emma left the state 2 days later. We sat in my living room while she waited for her ride to the airport, holding a paper cup of tea like it was a passport. She looked different already. Still fragile, but lighter, like someone had taken a pack off her back. I found a cousin in Oregon, she said. She doesn't know everything, but she knows enough. I'm going to work, save, breathe. You don't owe me anything, I told her. She shook her head. You gave me back the part of myself that remembered I could choose. She glanced at Andrea, who was leaning in the doorway, one arm still in a sling. Take care of her, and don't let my past make you small. When Emma hugged me goodbye, she whispered, what we had was real. But this is right. The door closed behind her. Andrea crossed the room and pulled me carefully into her arms. Luna leapt onto the couch between us, indignant at being excluded from any emotional development. Andrea laughed softly against my hair. And in that quiet room, after violence, after fear, after the past had tried to write its own ending, we chose to keep writing ours. Together. 6 months passed like a long exhale after holding your breath underwater. The bruises faded from Andrea's ribs. The cut above her eyebrow healed into a thin silver line, and the nights grew quieter. Not empty, just calmer. We learned how to move inside the truth we'd promised each other. Hard conversations replaced hidden ones. Fear still visited, but it no longer lived with us. Sometimes Andrea woke from dreams she didn't talk about, and sometimes I froze over piano keys when old memories crept back, but we faced those moments the way we faced everything now, together, in the open, without apology for being human. I poured myself into my music in a way I never had before. The piece I'd begun the night Andrea first sat on my couch took shape at last, growing into something layered and alive. It started sharp and guarded, then unraveled into a melody that refused to stay small. I called it convergence because that was what she had been to me, a meeting point between who I was and who I could become. When I submitted it to the Utah Composers Competition, I didn't tell anyone, not even Andrea. Some dreams are so tender, you were afraid the world will bruise them just by knowing their name. On the night of the performance, I stood backstage with my hands shaking so badly I had to lace my fingers together to steady them. The murmur of the audience seeped through the curtain like distant surf. When I peeked out, I found Andrea in the front row instantly, her posture relaxed now, her shoulder fully healed, wearing the navy dress that made her eyes look almost unreal. She caught my gaze and mouthed, "I love you." The fear loosened its grip. The orchestra began. As the first notes filled the hall, something inside me unclenched. The music carried every version of us. The anger of the clinic, the quiet of coffee shops, the terror of the warehouse, the gentleness of late nights when the world felt small and safe. When the final note faded, the silence was so complete it felt sacred. Then the room erupted. Applause rose to its feet. I bowed through tears, barely registering the conductor's voice when he announced the winner. My name echoed across the hall like a promise finally kept. After the reception blurred itself into congratulations and business cards, I slipped out onto the terrace, needing air more than praise. Andrea was already there, the city lights glowing behind her. She smiled when she saw me, the kind of smile that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with knowing. "There's my composer," she said, pulling me into her arms. "You did it." "No," I whispered into her shoulder. "We did." She laughed softly, then stepped back, her expression shifting into something careful. She reached into her jacket pocket and sank down onto one knee. My breath stopped. "Vivien Mitchell," she said, voice steady despite the emotion burning in her eyes. "You taught me that love doesn't mean surviving someone. It means choosing them, over and over. You saw beauty in places I'd only learned to armor, and you trusted me with your whole heart, even when it scared you. I don't want a life that doesn't have your music in it. I don't want a future that isn't built beside you. Will you marry me?" I didn't remember falling to my knees with her. I only remembered laughing and crying at the same time, words tumbling out like they were afraid of being too late. "Yes," I said. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." She slid the ring onto my finger, a simple silver band engraved with the opening notes of Convergence, and it fit like it had always belonged there. We kissed under the open sky while the city shimmered below us, two women who had fought for the right to stand in the light. 3 months later, Andrea's shooting range looked nothing like the place where she first taught me to breathe. White flowers softened the steel. Warm lights traced gentle constellations across the ceiling. Our friends and chosen family filled the space with laughter and tears, including Emma, who had flown in from Oregon with a woman who held her hand like it was something precious instead of fragile. When the officiant pronounced us married, Andrea dipped me in dramatic triumph and kissed me while the room exploded in applause. As we swayed together on the range floor to a quiet recording of my piano, Andrea rested her forehead against mine. "No more running," she murmured. "No more hiding," I answered. Outside, the world went on with its noise and its judgments and its unfinished stories. But inside that circle of light, surrounded by people who knew what it had cost us to stand there, I understood something simple and unshakable. Justice doesn't always arrive as punishment. Sometimes it arrives as freedom. Sometimes it arrives as love that refuses to stay small. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to answer the call when it comes, it arrives as the life you once thought you'd never be allowed to live.